you. Welcome to California, and thank you, my dear friend Alex. I am so proud to support you as you continue in your leadership in our great state, and we have an embarrassment of riches, to be sure. I know the first Latino Senate Pro Tem in modern history, Kevin DeLeon, is here as well. We have an embarrassment of riches, and you know, all of us here are elected, are appointed, so we know how our profession can be. But I will tell you that we are very fortunate to have a lot of stars in this state who work together and are truly friends and committed to our collective desire and responsibility to serve the people we represent. So thank you for that generous introduction. So welcome. There's so much I want to say, but I've been given 7 minutes. So I'm going to keep it brief. But I think that it's important to recognize, as everyone here clearly is, the significance of NALEO and its reason for being. And in appreciating its reason for being and its purpose and its responsibility and the duty it has assumed, we know then that all of us in this room have many things in common, in spite of the fact that we have diverse interests and priorities in many ways. But we have at least 2 things in common, I think all of us. And the one is that for most of us in this room, we are one of the first, if not the first, to do what we do. And for most of us in this room, if not everyone in this room, we do what we do because we believe truly in the magnificence of our country and are committed to fighting for its highest ideals at every step of the way. And so when I think about the purpose and the reason for being and the commonality that we share, I think of it also in the context of something we will commemorate or celebrate next week, which is the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And in thinking about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, 50 years later, we know it and remember it to be a product of a coalition of people who came together to fight for the ideals of our country, for that promise we made in 1776 that we are all and should be treated as equals. We know that in the coalition that came around that movement, there were people who fought hard and some who died to make it real and make it true. And we know then also, for many reasons, that document is not just a piece of paper that was signed into law 50 years ago. It is very much still a living, breathing document, a document that outlined for our country and reminds, unfortunately, some folks who may need to be reminded of the great promise, which indicates that there are certain fundamental rights that always must be protected. There are fundamental rights that relate to education, that relate to economic opportunity, that relate to giving human beings and the people who live in this country the ability to live a productive life and live with dignity. So when I think about the work we are all here to rededicate ourselves to doing, and the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, can't help but reflect on where we are today. On the issue of education, for example, we look at this country and we know that the graduation rates from high school for communities of color are embarrassing. We look at the graduation rates and we see that for white students it's 79%, for Latino students it's 68%, and for African American students it's 62%. Who will graduate from high school in our country. When we look at an issue like we've been examining in California, the issue of elementary school truancy, kindergarten through 6th graders, missing 50, 60, up to 80 days of school as youngest of our children, and recognize that among Latino elementary school students in California, they are absent 4.5 times more than their white counterparts. We know that as it relates to that fundamental right to have equal access to education, that there is still a lot of work to be done. When we look at the issue of economics and the right, the ability everyone should have to work hard and in that way aspire to and in fact live the American dream. We know that in terms of equal access to that opportunity, there's still a lot of work to be done these 50 years later. We can look at the statistics that tell us white women earn 78 cents on the dollar compared to white men. African American women earn 64 cents on the dollar. With that comparison, Latinas earn 53 cents on the dollar in that comparison. We still have a lot of work to do. When we look at the fundamental principles underlying the motivation for and creation of the Civil Rights Act, we also know that it was designed with an understanding that in this great country of ours, there should never be an underclass. There should never be a very defined group of people who are forced to live in the shadows, who are considered second class. And then when we look at, as has been discussed, what is not happening in Washington, D.C. around comprehensive immigration reform, we know we have a lot of work yet to do. We can look at it also in terms of something that my office and I have worked on for the last few years in California, relating the issue of the need for immigration reform to an issue that all of us know our constituents have on their top list of priorities, which is public safety. And we can connect that then to a policy that was called Secure Communities. And in mapping out how it worked, we know, and in fact I issued a bulletin in 2012 to say it ain't working as it was intended and designed to do. And in fact, it allowed the Immigration Service to pick up and detain up to 30% of undocumented immigrants who, by ICE's own definition, were non-criminal. So I issued a bulletin to all of the police chiefs and sheriffs and district attorneys of California back then, letting them know of the research that we had done that makes it very clear those detainer requests are just that, a request. They are not mandatory, and let's leave it up to the discretion of our law enforcement leaders in those particular communities to make the decision about what is in the best interest of public safety for their community, instead of allowing them to use the limited resources we have to make sure that we have a country that is stable and great. And in particular, let us not be subsumed in a way that recognizes something that is very important. We have to recognize that we have designed our system of government in this country in a very smart way, and we all know that as elected and appointed officials. There are the responsibilities of the federal branch, there are the responsibilities of the state branch, there are the responsibilities of the local branch. Public safety rightly was designed as the responsibility of the local branch, and as a career prosecutor who has personally prosecuted everything from low-level offenses to homicides, I will tell you that a system like Secure Communities that allows victims of crime to live in the shadow because the predator convinces her that it's she that will be treated like the criminal if she goes to a law enforcement or a police officer, that is not a smart public policy decision, and it is not true to the ideals of our country in saying that we will not have an underclass or those that live in the shadows. And finally, when I think about this issue, I think about it in the context of, again, who we all are in this room. You know, my mother used to have a saying, and she would say to my sister and me, you may be the first to do many things, but make sure you're not the last. And I know that when we talk about the ideals of NALEO, it is very much about that. But I also think about this room, and when I look around at the folks who are here, and I know that many of us share another common experience, which is that experience that I'm sure many of you have had, where somebody, a constituent, shows up at the front window of your office, and they say the only person they want to speak with is you. I've had that experience so many times, where some woman who looks like one of our mothers shows up and says, the only person I want to talk with is you. And that highlights that experience, the great duty and responsibility those of us in this room have. Yes, our interests are diverse. Our priorities are diverse and varied and many. But we in this room also carry an additional responsibility and duty to ensure that the people who are so proud of the fact that we stand in these places make sure that their voices are heard, knowing often they are some of the most voiceless. So we have the responsibility of being the voice for the voiceless. And we have the responsibility of ensuring as we go forward that we cultivate with the folks who are proud of us, cultivate their trust in our government. And these may seem like two different points, but they are entirely connected. Because when we as a country get to the point where all people feel the protection of the Civil Rights Act to the extent that they have full trust in their government, then we will truly be living the ideals of our country. So I thank everyone here for your leadership.